Picture this. A blue, cheerful genie pops out of a lamp, cracks a few jokes, grants 3 wishes, and everyone lives happily ever after. That's the story we've been sold. That's the lie. The real Jinn don't grant wishes. They don't smile. And they sure as hell don't disappear back into a lamp when you're done with them. What they do is far worse. In a small village outside Beirut, there's a house that's been abandoned for 40 years. The doors are sealed. The windows are bricked up. Local children won't go near it, even on a dare. Ask anyone over 50 why, and they'll tell you the same thing in a hushed voice. A Jinn lives there. They're not joking. They're not speaking metaphorically. They genuinely believe that something ancient and malevolent claimed that house in 1983, and it's still there, waiting. This isn't some isolated superstition. Across the Middle East and North Africa, the Jinn are as real to people as you or me. Educated professionals, doctors, engineers, people who use smartphones and drive luxury cars will casually mention protecting their homes from Jinn. They'll hang specific verses above doorways. They'll avoid certain places after sunset. They'll refuse to speak the word Jinn aloud at night, because to name them is to invite their attention. Why? Because for thousands of years, people have been encountering something in these regions, something that defies explanation. The word Jinn comes from an ancient root meaning hidden or concealed. They are, by their very nature, the things you don't see until it's too late. The shadow in your peripheral vision, the footsteps in an empty room, that overwhelming feeling that you're being watched when you're completely alone. Islamic tradition describes them as beings created from smokeless fire, forged from scorching wind. Not metaphorically, literally. They exist in our world but aren't bound by its physical laws. They can shift their form at will. A man one moment, a massive dog the next, a column of living shadow after that. Solid, then vapor, then solid again. But here's what makes them truly terrifying. They have free will. They can think, plan, hate. Unlike mindless monsters that act on instinct, the Jinn are intelligent. When they interact with humans, it's deliberate. And according to those who've survived encounters, once a Jinn has decided to focus on you, there's almost no way to make it stop. In 1997, a construction crew in Dubai refused to continue work on a luxury hotel. All 40 men walked off the job simultaneously. The developer threatened lawsuits, offered triple pay, brought in religious leaders to bless the site. Nothing worked. The crew had seen something in the foundation, something with eyes that glowed green in the darkness, and they would not go back. The project was eventually completed by a different crew, but 3 workers died in accidents during construction. Coincidence? The survivors don't think so. The encounters follow patterns. First, there's the dread. Witnesses describe the air becoming heavy, oppressive, like the moment before a terrible storm. Your body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up. Then comes the paralysis. Not always physical, but mental. You know you should run, but you can't. Your legs won't move. Or worse, they move without your permission, carrying you toward the thing you're desperately trying to escape. When the Jinn finally reveal themselves, certain features appear again and again across centuries of reports. Eyes that glow with unnatural light, usually green or amber. Bodies that seem to absorb darkness rather than cast shadows. Limbs that are too long, joints that bend the wrong way. Movements that are almost human but just wrong enough to trigger every primal alarm in your brain. And the locations. Abandoned bathhouses. Railway stations closed for decades. Certain groves of trees that locals give wide berths. Crossroads. Still water. These aren't random. The Jinn are drawn to threshold spaces, places between one thing and another, between civilization and wilderness, between day and night, between our world and theirs. Here's what keeps me up at night. These stories aren't ancient history. Last month, a woman in Lebanon posted on social media about seeing a figure with backward-facing feet outside her apartment. Within hours, dozens of people had replied with similar experiences. In 2018, a family driving home from a gathering stopped their car in front of a railway station. They don't know why. The driver's foot just hit the brake. Then they watched something run toward them from the trees, something with legs too long and a gait that looked like it was riding an invisible horse. All 4 people in that car saw it. All 4 described the same impossible thing. Sleep paralysis, the skeptics say, hallucinations, cultural conditioning. But how do you explain multiple witnesses seeing identical details? How do you explain the physical evidence? Doors that won't open, scratch marks that appear on sealed rooms, the pattern of deaths that follow certain encounters. The Jinn appear in Arabian folklore, yes, but also in Celtic legends as the Fae, in Japanese tradition as yokai, in Native American stories as skinwalkers. Different continents, different cultures with no historical contact, all describing the same basic phenomenon. Intelligent, non-human entities that share our world and occasionally cross into our perception. Always dangerous, always unpredictable, always leaving traumatized witnesses in their wake. What you're about to hear are 3 stories. Real encounters, reported by real people. Names have been changed, but nothing else. No embellishment needed. The truth is terrifying enough. The first involves a child, a loving father, and a shadow with green eyes. It ends with a death that medical science struggled to explain. The second takes place on a modern highway in 2018. A family, a car, and something that shouldn't exist chasing them down a suburban road. The third brings us to a forest where an educated professional found something that no map acknowledges exists. A building with no door, and a figure with hooves instead of feet. These aren't fairy tales. These aren't legends passed down through generations and distorted by time. These are recent events. These are the real Jinn. And after you hear these stories, you'll understand why, even now, even in the age of smartphones and satellites and rational thought, there are still people who won't say their name after dark. Because some things, once you've seen them, you can't unsee. Some knowledge, once you have it, you can't forget. And some entities, once they've noticed you, never really let you go. The Jinn are still here. They've always been here. And they're not hiding as well as they used to. Lebanon, 1940s. A small house near the river. Afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. A little girl named Alice playing with her dolls on the living room floor. Her father working in the yard outside, close enough to hear if she calls. A perfectly ordinary day. Until it wasn't. Alice couldn't have been more than 6 years old, too young to understand the stories the adults whispered about. Too young to know that some things in this world wear darkness like a cloak. She was alone in the room, but she felt safe. Her father was just outside. She could hear him working, the rhythmic sound of his tools. Then the air changed. She couldn't explain it, not then. Not even 70 years later when she finally told her family what happened. The room became heavier, colder. The kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with wrongness. She looked around. The sunlight was still there. Her toys were still scattered around her. Everything looked normal, but something was watching her. Her eyes found the corner near the kitchen door. Unlike the rest of the space bathed in afternoon light, that corner was dark. Deeply, unnaturally dark. Shadows don't usually pool like that in the middle of the day. This one moved. Alice stared as the darkness shifted, contracted, almost seemed to breathe. For a moment, it took the shape of a man, tall, impossibly tall, then dissolved back into formless shadow. She tried to look away, tried to go back to playing, but her eyes kept returning to that corner, pulled by something she couldn't resist. The third time she looked, her heart stopped. The kitchen door was open, just a crack. She hadn't heard it move, and through that crack she could see a silhouette, the outline of a man, or something shaped like a man. But it was completely black, not dark clothing or dim lighting. This was absence, a hole in reality shaped like a human being. Then it stepped into the room. Alice crawled backward, her toys forgotten, her eyes locked on the figure. It moved with deliberate slowness, like it had all the time in the world, like it knew she couldn't escape. The door creaked wider with each step, and then she saw them. 2 points of brilliant emerald green light appeared on the featureless face, not reflecting light, generating it, glowing from within with an intensity that had nothing natural about it. Those eyes fixed on her, and in that moment, Alice knew with absolute certainty that this thing wanted her, not to scare her, not to play. It wanted to take her somewhere, and if it succeeded, she would never come back. She screamed. Her father was already running toward the front door before her second scream left her throat. But when he grabbed the handle, the door wouldn't open. Not locked, not stuck. It simply refused to move, as if the wood itself had fused with the frame. He could hear his daughter screaming inside, and he couldn't get to her. He didn't hesitate. There was a cinder block nearby left over from some repair work. He grabbed it and smashed it through one of the door panels. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and when he looked through the hole, what he saw would haunt him for the last 3 days of his life. His little girl was pressed into the corner, as far from the center of the room as she could get, and advancing toward her was a shadow in the shape of a man, tall enough that its head nearly touched the ceiling, featureless except for 2 glowing green eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. The thing heard the crash. Slowly, with obvious irritation at being interrupted, it turned its head toward the broken door, toward Alice's father, and their eyes met. In that instant, he felt it. A wave of pure, undiluted malice. This wasn't an animal defending territory. This wasn't a human with human motivations. This was something ancient and cruel, something that existed to cause suffering, and it was angry that he had interfered. He kicked the door, once, twice, his legs screaming in protest. The wood was old, rotted from proximity to the river. On the third kick, it gave way completely, and he fell into the room, crashing onto the floor. The shadow was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. The room was bright with afternoon sunlight. His daughter was crying in the corner, but she was alive. She was safe. He'd saved her. 3 days later, he was dead. The doctor was puzzled. Gangrene developing with impossible speed. The infection had entered through the injuries on his leg, the wounds from breaking through the door. But gangrene doesn't work that fast. It doesn't kill a healthy man in 72 hours. The bacteria came from the rotted wood, yes, but this case didn't follow normal patterns. The infection spread too quickly, responded to no treatment. It acted like it had purpose. Alice's family had their own explanation. The Jinn had marked her. When her father intervened, when he made eye contact with that entity, he'd drawn its attention, and the Jinn, denied its original prey, had taken him instead. Not directly, they're more subtle than that. But the injuries, the bacteria-laden wood, the door that wouldn't open until he'd hurt himself, those weren't coincidences. The Jinn had orchestrated his death. Alice lived with that knowledge for the rest of her life. Her father had died saving her. But the question haunted her. Had the entity wanted her all along? Or had it lured her in to draw her father to his doom? She would never know. And before she died, she told her great-nephew one more detail she'd never shared with anyone. The night after her father's funeral, she saw those green eyes again, watching her from the same corner of the room, just for a moment, just long enough for her to know. It remembered her. Fast forward to 2018. A modern highway outside Beirut. Streetlights, paved roads. A young man named Rami driving home with his cousin, his mother, and his aunt after a tense family gathering. Everyone silent, irritable, lost in their own thoughts. The evening was unseasonably hot, the kind that makes people irrational. Rami was focused on the road, counting the minutes until he could drop everyone off. They were approaching the outskirts of town, familiar territory. He'd driven this route 100 times. Then, without warning, without conscious decision, his foot slammed on the brake. The car screeched to a halt in front of an old railway station, long abandoned. Rami's hands froze on the wheel. He hadn't decided to stop. The thought hadn't formed in his mind before his body acted. 1 second driving, the next stopped, and he had no idea why. Nobody in the car questioned it. 4 people, all silent, all staring at the darkened building like they were waiting for something. Rami's cousin saw it first. His hand shot out, grabbing Rami's leg, his other hand pointing out the driver's side window. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a breathless gasp. Something was running toward them from the trees. In the dim glow of the streetlight, it looked almost human. Almost. It wore clothes, filthy, mud-stained, once white but now the color of old bone. Long, unkempt hair hung over its face, reaching past its shoulders. But the legs, God, the legs, they were stretched, elongated beyond any human proportion, and the way it moved wasn't running. It was skipping, bouncing, the body swaying and bending in ways that spines don't bend, like it was riding an invisible horse, rising and falling with each stride. Rami couldn't move. His foot rested on the accelerator. His brain screamed at him to drive, but his body wouldn't respond. He was watching himself from outside, a character in a horror movie who refuses to run. The thing got closer. 20 meters, 15, 10. His family was screaming now. The sounds felt distant, muffled, like he was underwater. All he could focus on was the figure approaching. It passed under another streetlight. The hair parted for just a second, and underneath there was nothing. Smooth skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank flesh where features should exist. 5 meters away. His mother's scream finally broke through. A sound of pure maternal terror that cuts through anything. Suddenly, Rami could move again. His foot crushed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, tires squealing. In the rearview mirror, the figure had stopped in the middle of the road, exactly where the car had been, kneeling. Its arms, which Rami hadn't noticed before because they'd been hidden in the folds of its clothing, stretched out toward the fleeing car. They extended far beyond where human arms should end, the joints bending at wrong angles, waving, not frantically, slowly, deliberately, like a mockery of a farewell. But here's the detail that Rami only noticed later, when he was home, when the adrenaline had faded and he was replaying the encounter in his mind. As the thing waved, the hair had shifted again. And for just a fraction of a second, he'd seen 2 points of light where the eyes should have been. Glowing green. The same green Alice had seen 70 years earlier, in a different country, in a different context. The same green that appears again and again in reports spanning centuries. A signature, a calling card. Ramey didn't stop driving until he reached his mother's house. 40 kilometers over the speed limit. 2 red lights run. 3 near accidents. He didn't care. All 4 of them stumbled out of the car, shaking, trying to process what they'd seen. But here's what keeps me awake. Ramey felt compelled to stop at that specific station. Something had reached into his mind and pulled the brake for him. The thing in the trees was waiting. It knew they were coming. And when they finally escaped, it didn't chase them. It didn't need to. It had shown them it existed. And it knew where to find them again. 2 encounters, 70 years apart. Different circumstances, different people, different countries. But the same elements. Overwhelming dread, loss of control, glowing eyes, and wrongness so profound it rewires your understanding of reality, and the unshakable feeling that these entities aren't appearing randomly. They're choosing their victims. But both Alice and Ramey encountered the Jinn in human spaces. A home, a highway. Places where we feel safe, where we believe we have control. What happens when you go to them? When you cross into their territory, into the wild places where civilization ends and something far older begins. Our third witness made that mistake. She went looking for peace and quiet, for nature, for a pleasant afternoon hike in the forests of Lebanon. What she found instead was a building that doesn't appear on any map, a structure with no door, and a figure with hooves instead of feet, beckoning her closer with eyes that burned the same emerald green. Because some places don't belong to us. They never did. And when you cross that threshold, you're not a hiker anymore. You're prey. Lebanon, 1992. A business conference at a luxury hotel nestled between the Mediterranean coast and one of the country's vast nature reserves. Mountains covered in dense cedar forests, the kind of landscape that appears on postcards. Beautiful, serene, safe. A young executive, let's call her Sarah, was exhausted from back-to-back meetings. She needed air, space, silence. She asked the hotel staff for recommendations. They smiled and suggested a hiking trail through the nearby forest. Well marked, they assured her. Easy to follow. You'll love it. They didn't tell her about the other things in those woods. Sarah set off in the early afternoon, energized by the prospect of solitude. The trailhead was clearly marked. The path was wide and well-maintained. For the first 20 minutes, everything was perfect. Birds singing, squirrels rustling through leaves, the gentle whisper of wind through the branches. Then the trail markers became less frequent, then sparse, then gone entirely. Sarah didn't panic immediately. She was intelligent, educated, rational. She backtracked, looking for the last marker she'd seen. But the forest all looked the same now. The trees had closed in around her. The path she'd been following had somehow disappeared. That's when she noticed the silence. When she'd first entered the forest, it had been alive with sound. Now, nothing. No birds, no insects, no wind. The kind of absolute silence that makes your ears ring. The kind that tells every animal with survival instincts that a predator is near. Sarah stood completely still, listening. Her heart was pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. Something was wrong. Not just lost in the woods wrong. Something deeper, more primal. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to run, to get out. She picked a direction and started walking fast. Not quite running, but close. pushing through underbrush, no longer caring about the trail, just focused on getting away from that oppressive silence, that feeling of being watched. After 10 minutes of near panic, she burst into a small clearing and stopped. In the center of the grove stood a building, small, brick, old but not ruined. It looked almost like a bathhouse, the kind that might have been used a century ago. But there was something wrong with it. Sarah circled the structure once, looking for an entrance. Nothing. Just 4 walls and a roof. No door. No windows. Just solid brick on all sides. She circled it again, thinking she must have missed something. Buildings have doors. That's how buildings work. But no matter how many times she walked around it, the result was the same. 4 walls, no entrance. This is impossible, she thought. Someone built this. Someone uses this. There has to be a way in. She completed her 3rd circuit and returned to where she'd started. A figure was standing there. Sarah's breath caught. Relief and terror hit simultaneously. Relief because another person meant she wasn't alone, meant she could ask for directions. Terror because something about this figure was immediately, viscerally wrong. It wore a long, flowing cloak, dark fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The hood was pulled up, completely obscuring the face, and it was standing perfectly still, positioned between Sarah and the trees, blocking her path back into the forest. Sarah's mouth opened to call out. Then she looked down. The figure's legs were visible beneath the cloak. They appeared human at first glance, but they didn't end in feet. They ended in something else, something that looked like hooves, blunted, covered in dark, bristly hair, like a goat's but larger. Wrong. Sarah gasped, a small sound barely audible, but in that absolute silence it might as well have been a scream. The figure's head tilted slightly, listening. Then slowly, with terrible deliberation, it raised one arm from beneath the cloak. The hand was human-shaped, but the proportions were off. The fingers too long, the joints too numerous. It pointed at Sarah. No, not at her. Past her, gesturing toward the building. "Come closer," the gesture said. "Come see." As the arm extended, a flicker of light appeared from within the hood. Emerald green, exactly where the eyes should be. That same impossible green that had appeared in Alice's living room in the 1940s. The same green Raimi had seen in his rearview mirror. A calling card spanning decades and hundreds of miles. Sarah didn't think. She didn't process. She didn't try to rationalize. Every cell in her body screamed one word: run. She spun and sprinted into the forest, crashing through branches, tripping over roots, not caring about direction or trails or anything except distance. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs gave out, until she collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. When she finally looked back, the clearing was gone. The building was gone. The figure was gone, and the sounds had returned. Birds chirping, wind rustling leaves, the normal, everyday sounds of a forest that had been completely absent minutes before. Sarah eventually found her way back to a road, found the hotel. She told the staff she'd gotten turned around but was fine. She didn't mention the building, didn't mention the figure. What would she say? That she'd found a structure with no door in a forest where nothing should exist? That a creature with hooves had beckoned her closer? She kept silent, finished her conference, prepared to leave. On her final day, she confided in one of the hotel maids. Just a brief mention, a testing of the waters to see if she'd be laughed at. The maid didn't laugh. Her face went completely still, completely expressionless, and in a flat, emotionless voice she said, "Creatures live deep in the woods. They were here before humans. You should never disturb them. If you do, they take an interest. And once they're interested, they don't forget. Then she walked away without another word. 3 stories, 3 different decades, 3 different contexts. But look at the pattern. Alice was in her home, but that home was near the river, a threshold between land and water. Raimi stopped at an abandoned railway station, a place of transition, neither origin nor destination. Sarah wandered into deep forest, the boundary between civilization and wilderness. The Jinn appear at thresholds, places between one thing and another, places where our world and theirs overlap. And in every case, the witnesses lost control. Alice couldn't look away from the corner. Raimi couldn't stop the car. Sarah found herself circling that impossible building again and again. The Jinn don't just appear. They manipulate. They reach into your mind and pull strings you didn't know existed. Then there are the eyes, always glowing, always green. This isn't reflected light. This is generated light. And it appears across centuries of reports from cultures that had no contact with each other. But here's what terrifies me most. They're intelligent. The shadow in Alice's room turned to look at her father, made eye contact, then orchestrated his death over 3 days. The figure on the highway waved at Rami's fleeing car. Mockery, deliberate and cruel. The hooved entity in the forest beckoned Sarah closer, trying to lure her to the building. These aren't random hauntings. These are calculated interactions. These are hunts. So what are they really? The theories multiply, but 2 stand out. First, energy beings. The Quran describes them as created from smokeless fire. What if that's not metaphor? What if they exist in a state between matter and energy? Plasma, perhaps, or something electromagnetic. This would explain their ability to appear and disappear, to generate light, to influence electronics. They're not shapeshifters struggling to maintain human form. They're beings from a different state of existence, trying to project into our 3-dimensional space. The translation is imperfect, which is why they always look slightly wrong. Second, interdimensional entities. They exist parallel to us, occasionally intersecting with our reality at specific locations where the barriers are thin. This explains the threshold phenomenon. It explains why certain places, forests, abandoned buildings, crossroads, are more dangerous than others. It explains why they seem to fade in and out of perception. But theories don't help when you're face to face with glowing green eyes in the darkness. So here's what you need to know. Here's how to recognize an encounter before it's too late. The warning signs come in stages. Environmental first. Sudden temperature drops with no source. The air becoming heavy, oppressive, hard to breathe. Electronics malfunctioning. Phones dying instantly. Lights flickering. And most tellingly, animals fleeing. Dogs refusing to enter certain spaces. Birds going silent. If wildlife is running, so should you. Then the psychological shift hits. Overwhelming dread with no obvious cause. The certainty of being watched. And here's the critical detail. Loss of agency. Finding yourself unable to move, unable to look away, or worse, compelled to move towards something when every instinct screams to run. In Riyadh, 2015, a security guard was making his rounds in an office building. He found himself walking toward the basement. He didn't want to go to the basement. He had no reason to go to the basement. But his legs kept moving, carrying him down the stairs, down into the darkness where the emergency lights had failed. He was reaching for the door handle when his phone rang. The sound broke whatever held him. He ran back up the stairs and quit that same night. The next guard took the job. 3 weeks later, they found him in that same basement. Heart attack, the coroner said. But the man was 28 years old, athletic, no history of heart problems, and his face, according to those who saw him, was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. That guard didn't recognize the compulsion for what it was, didn't fight it. By the time he understood, it was too late. If you feel your body acting against your will, if you find yourself drawn to places you know you shouldn't go, stop. Stop moving. Force yourself to break the pattern. Sit down if you have to. Cause yourself pain. Bite your tongue, dig your nails into your palm. Physical sensation can break mental manipulation. And if you see the physical manifestations, shadows moving independently of light sources, shapes that are almost human but wrong, those glowing eyes, don't investigate. Don't try to rationalize. Don't convince yourself it's your imagination. Trust your instincts. They evolved over millions of years to keep you alive, and right now they're screaming danger. Break eye contact immediately. Don't speak. Don't acknowledge the entity. Remove yourself from the location as quickly as possible, without running blindly. Panic makes you vulnerable. Move with purpose. Get to artificial light. Get to other people. The Jinn avoid direct interaction when multiple witnesses are present. Traditional protections vary by culture, but certain principles repeat. Thresholds matter, doorways especially. In Islamic tradition, specific Quranic verses offer protection, particularly Ayat al-Kursi. Many carry written verses or wear them as amulets. Salt and iron appear in protective rituals across multiple cultures. There might be something to this, or it might be that the ritual itself, the act of protecting yourself, creates a mental barrier the Jinn find difficult to penetrate. But here's the terrible truth. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. Sometimes they choose you, and all the protection in the world won't matter. Alice was playing in her own home. Rami was driving a familiar route. Sarah was following a recommended trail. None of them went looking for the Jinn. None of them transgressed obvious boundaries. And yet, the Jinn found them anyway. Because these entities have been here far longer than we have. They know this world in ways we never will. And sometimes, for reasons we can't understand, they decide a particular human is interesting. The deaths that follow Jinn encounters often appear natural. Heart attacks, infections, accidents, nothing that would raise medical suspicion. But look closer and patterns emerge. Unusual timing, medical conditions that progress too quickly, treatments that inexplicably fail. The Jinn are patient, they're subtle, and they can orchestrate your destruction over days, weeks, even years. So are they real? We have thousands of eyewitness accounts spanning millennia, consistent patterns across cultures with no historical contact, physical effects that witnesses describe but are difficult to measure after the fact, deaths that correlate with encounters. What we don't have is proof that would satisfy scientific skepticism. But I keep coming back to the witnesses. They're not crazy. They're not seeking attention. Many refuse to use their real names, refuse to go public. They gain nothing from reporting these encounters except ridicule. So why do they tell these stories? Because they need someone to believe them. Because they're terrified it will happen again. Because they're warning the rest of us. The Jinn remain at the edge of perception. Maybe they're psychological phenomena. Maybe they're interdimensional beings. Maybe they're exactly what the ancient texts say. Creatures of smokeless fire, given free will, choosing between light and darkness. Or maybe the truth is simpler and more terrifying. Maybe they're predators. Ancient, intelligent predators who learn to exist alongside humanity while remaining just hidden enough to avoid systematic study. Maybe they're in the forests, the abandoned buildings, the dark corners of our cities right now. Maybe they're watching, choosing their next target, waiting for the perfect moment to reach across and pull someone through. Alice thought she was safe in her father's house. Raimi thought he was safe on a modern highway. Sarah thought she was safe on a marked trail. They were all wrong. So tonight, when you're alone and you hear a sound that doesn't quite make sense, when you see a shadow move in your peripheral vision, when you feel that inexplicable dread settling over you, remember these stories. Remember that the line between our world and theirs is thinner than we'd like to believe. Remember that some things have been here far longer than we have. And remember that just because you can't see them doesn't mean they can't see you. The Jinn are patient, they're intelligent, and they never forget a face, especially one with eyes that met theirs, even for just a moment, glowing emerald green in the darkness. Sleep well.